Hello, everyone. Professor Philip Travis here. It is week 10, our final week here in History 111 at Eastern Oregon University, World History Part 1. First, let me say that I hope everyone has really enjoyed this term, this class, History 111, our World History course. I hope you have found the material, the readings, and the lectures and the announcements to be compelling and interesting, and I hope that this has been a fun learning experience for all of us. And in the future, I certainly look forward to hopefully having some of you back in another one of my history courses here at EOU. In the spring term, I'm, of course, offering my American history, both my upper division and my lower division American history courses. And in the fall, I will be offering the history of modern Germany, history 437, I believe, and I believe also history 112, which would be the second part of this class. So if you found this class enjoyable and an effective and fun learning experience, I would certainly enjoy having you back in another class. This week's our final week. Our reading this week from Patterns of World History is chapters 16 and 18. Our subject for this week is European exploration and the development of what is sometimes called the Columbian Exchange, as well as interactions between the Islamic Ottoman Empire and Western Europe as well. The Columbian Exchange refers to the exchange that occurs when the Old World, this area here, and particularly driven by explorers from this area, begin to encounter and interconnect North, South, and Central America with the rest of the interconnected world. It's known as the Columbian Exchange, named largely because of the first European explorer to begin the process of establishing permanent trade routes and permanent settlements in the Americas, of course, the Italian from Genoa, Columbus, whose first voyage, of course, occurred in 1492, albeit Columbus did not know the Americas even existed due to the very poor maps and lack of understanding of the world that existed at this time. So we're going to look at European exploration, particularly the exploration that begins in the 1400s under the leadership of the Portuguese, who under the leadership of Henry the Navigator began exploring the coast of Western Africa, eventually under Vasco da Gama creating a trade route to India and establishing the trading port of Goa, and also, of course, the Portuguese establishing the roots of modern Brazil as they discovered in the European context the tip of what is today the country of Brazil, where the Portuguese would establish sugar plantations that were, of course, worked by African slaves, and those plantations were incredibly brutal. The average lifespan of a slave on the sugar plantations of Brazil oftentimes was no longer than about 3 years. They were incredibly brutal. So we're going to look at European exploration and the Columbian Exchange. Reading this week is chapter 16 and 18. We're going to be looking at the emergence of, and of course we know there was exploration, of course, before the 1400s. The Vikings, of course, had explored areas of Greenland, Iceland, and areas of North America. Of course, they did not establish permanent and lasting settlements in those places. There was also significant explorations by the Ming Chinese Empire, which were also in the 1400s, but were short-lived, exploring the Indian Ocean and the areas of the Pacific around the Philippines, for example, in Indonesia, under the leadership of Zheng He, the explorations of Ming Dynasty China. So there were other explorations, but we are going to particularly be looking at European exploration beginning in the 1400s and really the process of conquest in the Americas, of colonization in the Americas, and the creation of an interconnected global world system. This map is really demonstrating this for you. This area right here, these areas here, particularly Africa, the Mediterranean, Western European world, India, China, of course, the areas of the Islamic empires. This part of the world, this was the old world, and it was interconnected in long distance trade routes before the explorations of European explorers in the 1400s. With the explorations of Columbus, which began, of course, in 1492, and of course we know Columbus was seeking a trade route with Asia. He did not actually know that the Americas existed. And his voyage was commissioned by the King and Queen of Spain, Ferdinand and Isabella. Columbus arguing that, again, not knowing the Americas existed, that establishing a direct trade route from Spain to Asia would allow the Spanish to really capitalize on a huge trade market that at this time went through long distance overland and sea trade routes in this area. And of course, the Portuguese and also the Spanish had to pay a great deal more for goods because of the amount of sort of taxes and the degree to which the price of goods would increase as they passed in more and more hands in the trade process across the Silk Roads here in Asia, through the Red Sea and the Persian Gulf, and into the areas controlled by the Venetians in Venice, who controlled much of this area of the Mediterranean. But in doing this, Columbus, of course, really sets in motion a process whereby European explorers in the 1400s and the 1500s particularly will establish the foundations for an interconnected global world system. And this map is showing you all of the most significant voyages of explorers during this time period, with, of course, Vasco da Gama making it to India in 1498. Of course, Cabral, Pedro Alvarez Cabral, sighting Brazil here, Columbus, 1492. Of course, landing on the island of San Salvador. Of course, you see here Cortez's route into the Aztec Empire, where their capital was Tenochtitlan, where Cortez would ultimately siege, and eventually conquer the Aztecs with assistance from other rival native tribes, and of course significantly diseases like smallpox, which were exchanged from Europe to from the old world to the new world. The Columbian Exchange refers to an exchange process, the transfer of plants, animals, diseases, ideas, people even. Of course, we know there were massive amounts of human populations, particularly from West Africa, that were taken to the Americas against their will as slaves in the so-called Atlantic Passage or the Middle Passage, part of what's sometimes called the Atlantic System. Slavery became a dominant force in the Americas, and it was unique because of its scale and the fact that it tended to rely particularly on those of West African origin. The slave system was brutal to the people who suffered it. It caused a great deal of demographic alteration in Africa and the Americas, and of course established the roots of racism that continues to still exist in the modern world. The factoid for this week is global interconnectivity. This is a world history class, and from the beginning of this class, when we looked at the origin of the first empires in Mesopotamia, we looked at the sharing of ideas that came to be very important within various cultural groups, ideas relating to law codes, ideas related to religion, trade between places like the Indus River civilization and the Mesopotamian civilization, for example. We looked at the incredible sharing of ideas, the interconnection of the Mediterranean world under the Roman Empire, which allowed the Pax Romana ideas associated with religious ideas like that of Christianity to be shared and exchanged over a long distance. So we have really examined throughout this class the increasing interconnections of the world and how these interconnections really shape the future. And that's really what world history it does. A world historian is kind of unique than a historian that just looks at a particular nation, for example, a particular country or a particular culture. A world historian's lens of analysis is particularly examining the interconnections of people in regional and or global areas, and examining how those interconnections create and shape the future, how those interconnections drive historical change over time. And so that's the factoid for this week. Change over time. For historians, for world historians, the study of change over time in history is largely focused on studying and examining the interconnections of people. The interconnections of people from different places who bring different ideas, they bring different animals, they bring different plants, they bring different diseases, and so forth, and how those changes create the path for the world of the future. This week we really see that on a global scale, with the Columbian Exchange emerging with catastrophic consequences for many, massive consequences, catastrophic consequences for the peoples of the Americas, catastrophic consequences for people of West Africa, in the creation of a truly interconnected global world system. I hope everyone has enjoyed this class, and let me know if you have any questions. This week, oh, by the way, this week I will hold a Zoom office hours. It'll be about 30 minutes, and I have to look at my calendar, so I will let everyone know the schedule. I'll send an email, but it'll probably be Tuesday or Wednesday. And if you can, come into my office hours, ask me any question you have. If you have to write the second paper, questions on the paper, which is due Sunday, or look over the study guide if you want to review a little bit. Ask me questions about the test. The test, of course, is due Wednesday of exam week, so we have a little time there. So if you're able and it works with your time frame, please do pop in and say hi and ask some questions when I have open office hours via Zoom. And with that, I hope everyone has had a great time in this class. I look forward to seeing some of you in a class of mine in the future. Let's have a great week, and I will see everyone in the discussion forum.